Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Tree Actions, the Human Forestry Podcast. And joining Tony and I today, all the way from Central North British Columbia, is longtime instructor and colleague Kyle Larden. Hey, Kyle, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for inviting me on. Looking forward.
No problem, man. Thanks for coming out. It's been good.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to your. I know a bit of your story, and I know it's rich in history and in the trees. The trees have been part of your life for a while, but we always ask people as a way to kind of get things flowing, how they would describe their journey in the human forest, where and how it all kind of began. You know, for some it goes right back to climbing trees as a kid. For some it's a little bit, they ended up helping out at a tree company, and for some it's completely different. So maybe you could just kick it off by telling us how you feel, your recollection of how your journey in the human forest began. Where did it all start for you?
I guess for me, I always, like anybody that is involved with trees, like being outside, like being in the trees. Always, as kids, we grew up in a rural 10-acre parcel. I guess my cousins lived right across the road, another 10-acre parcel, and we always were outside building forts, with sticks and lean-tos and that kind of stuff. But as a kid, you don't realize that that's a big part of you. And then fast forward, getting out of high school, had a family friend ask me to go and run a chainsaw and basically buck logs in the logging industry to fit on the logging trucks. And anybody that's been in courses with me knows during my my earn the right that I have, I go through this story about my journey going from bucking to then working for a former hockey coach of ours and family friend. And he started me hand falling in the business. That was like 1996. And then started my own contract falling company in 97 and did that pretty much exclusively for the next 15-ish years or so. Maybe not even quite that, maybe 12 years or something, just falling, staying in camps, doing that kind of thing. And then as the journey progressed, I went to ARBCAN courses. I started climbing trees, of course, went online and bought a saddle and watched some YouTube videos to learn how to climb trees. And a former and still a colleague, a falling partner of mine who started climbing before me, said that I needed to take some courses if I wanted to have any success and longevity in the climbing industry. So that's where I was introduced to ARBCAN and met Dwayne subsequently through hand falling, or the technical tree falling and hazard and danger tree courses. And that kind of started my journey into the training side of it. But,
Yeah. I remember you were quite, I don't know what the word is, committed to, it was the first time that we had someone interested in taking our courses that was really fully fledged from what I would consider the logging forestry background. As far as, you were a full-time active, faller. And wasn't there an incentive program or something to train, like to get out of the logging, retrain or something?
yeah, there was a program in BC. I don't even remember the title, but it was like the Business Development Bank or something like that had a $5,000 incentive to retrain out of the forest industry. And so I put that money towards ARBCAN training, which was, a real huge step going from falling trees on the ground to climbing trees. But still, it was a different avenue or a different basket. And so, I basically talked through conversation with Nancy in the office and went through the process of getting ARBCAN signed up as a facilitator or as a trainer recognized in BC through this program, which subsequently I think a few other guys did after that, because it had to be a school or training that was in BC, which Arbcan's office is in Alberta. So we went through that process.
I find it interesting that they, would consider, the arborist industry separate from forestry, because there's so many similarities, yet it is quite different, so, it isn't that far of a leap from the, well, I don't know. It's, what do you feel like, you having really had a career in both, like, how would you describe the similarities and the differences between, the forestry work you did and now the urban forestry work you kind of do?
Oh, well, both the similarities and the differences are so small but so huge that I don't know where to start or where to end it. Very much you're using chainsaws and you're working with trees, but the limited tools you have coming from a forestry background, meaning only basically a wedge pouch and an axe to pound wedges, coming to the arboriculture side of things and having the ability to set ropes from the ground and just the vast array of tools really opens up another world as far as having control of your trees and actual precision falling and when there's high consequences, when there's power lines and houses and yards and fences and shops involved. So that's a really tough question to answer in a 1 hour segment.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's there isn't a lot of people, would you say, that have made the transition?
I think there is. Well, I guess it's a small world, so I know a lot of them. But there's definitely a few and some really, really good guys and gals who have made the transition, I guess, and the transition isn't huge, but it's like any industry. It just depends how much you want to learn and how far do you want to take it. Do you want to keep using a hammer to build cupboards, or do you want to use some more intricate tools and tools that are going to help you do a finer job?
Yeah, I think I know I see it too. Like more and more, I see people coming into forestry or coming into arboriculture from forestry. But then I also kind of see it the other way too. People from going from forestry into more of a cutting scenario. And you're right. I always kind of describe it to kind of like cousins, right? Like they're similar, they're from the same family tree, but just the way you go about things is very different. I think the problems come in is when you go from one to the other and you only take the tool set from one to the next one, right? So if you're a feller and you go into tree work and all you add is a rope and a harness, it's not going to go well for you, Whereas if you're a tree guy and you go into logging and you're bringing 70 different ways to get a tree down, you're probably going to be the slowest cutter that ever existed. There's certain circumstances and risk, I always tell people in the arborist world, if your cut goes 3 foot off, you might land it in the middle of a $7 million house. In the woods, if your cut goes 3 foot off, provided you're not underneath it, you probably have a good story and you have to pay the skidder operator a little bit more. And, but cause so you can pull it out. So circumstances and stuff are different, but I do see that crossover a little bit. I just, where people get confused is they assume the tool that works in one, whether it be a felling cut, a full wrap chainsaw bar, whatever, well, if it works well in one, it's automatically got to work well in the other. It's like, no, not really. Like it can, but not really.
Well, it brings up a really good point, it's along these lines of differences and similarities. And I think both industries are plagued with tradition and historical ways of doing things, habits, the notching. We haven't gotten into this at all yet with anyone on the podcast, but, the dogma around specific type of notching and what notch works the best and so on and so forth. Certainly the Humboldt is one that always comes up and is, kind of, very, very associated with forestry or logging. And then you have, and of course that has bled into urban forestry as well. But there you have the introduction of more open notches for the concept of control. But even that gets disputed. I'm curious, Kyle, how do you navigate that? When you teach, having, and I guess maybe a little more personally, or just your thoughts on when you first were exposed to it. Coming from, I don't imagine you were exposed to it. I don't even know if we've talked about this specifically, but how much of a revelation was it, and how hard was it, or was it easy for you to transition and say, okay, I get it, the open notch makes sense, or what are your thoughts on that whole uh, topic as it exists within the two industries?
Opposed to what we're talking about is an open face conventional, which is a conventional notch, but it's opened up 70 to 90 degrees. And I say it like everybody should know it, but not everyone does. So you have to think about it, and then it's odd when you first see it. Anyways, I was exposed to it, Dwayne, when I took the course in Calgary with you in 2010, I believe. And so I had spent 13 years, I guess, or 14, 15-ish years strictly on Humboldt. And that was, you drilled into me that that's the only way to fall trees. There is this other notch, just the conventional, but it has all these downsides, and you have to raise the back cut significantly more and all this. But the thing that I lacked was the scientific knowledge on what happens with the tree with stump shot, back pressure on the stump, as far as when the tree's going through the arc of its fall, where the force is applied, and basically the why behind, what controls a tree and what goes on. And so when I was first exposed to it, my mind, how it works is I really like to have the why, the concepts behind what's happening with the tree and the hinge and the stump. And so when that's fully explained to me, it was easy to accept because it just made sense. It was
Yeah, and it's a tough one, isn't it, to explain that, because the science of it is so variable, in the fact that, wood, how green the wood is, how deep the notch is will change that reaction, and there's always going to be that element of art and science blend that's pretty, I think, going to be pretty evident in felling alone, let alone the other aspects of arboriculture. So did you feel you found that you gained enough of that or was it one of those things you definitely had to try it for yourself? I know when I first took it, when I first learned it, I was a very conventional notch cutter and a Humboldt to some degree. I seem to reserve the Humboldt. It was something I did more with tops for some reason. It was just the way I was taught, is what it was. And when I first learned from Tim, the open notch from Tim Ard, I really had a hard time with it. I really, really struggled. Did you find that, or did you find that you were able to adopt it more, or did it take you a bit?
No, I mean, I can't remember the specifics of it, and I was still mostly a production, logging hand faller. But as soon as I had the concepts in my head, and when I practiced it, even in the class, it was so easy to cut. It was so easy to get a nice clean notch and have your cuts line up every time, that it was very easy for me to accept and to then employ into my regular daily practice. And it's my absolute default now, combine that with a board back cut, and having a strap for your
I guess that's another whole thing that, I don't think those techniques are absent from the forestry world. They just seem to be it's a real specialized exception in logging versus kind of more the default that we find in the way, I guess what we kind of lean towards in the way we've taught our programming. But was that a very new thing for you too then? I can't remember.
No, I had learned that when I was actually working in the interior rainforest, and it was in a camp on the north arm of Quesnel Lake. So it was very remote, either boat or fly in. And one of the fallers out there, and he was one of my mentors at the time. Well, two of them, Ted Simmons and Trent. Geez, I can't even think of his last name. Tobe was his business. Anyway, he had a big part in mentoring me in like large cedar, like we're talking 9-10 foot diameter cedar, but they're totally hollow. They might have a 4-inch shell. So I learned out there to leave that back strap, just so that you could finish your back cut and get your hinge thin enough on either side of the tree, because you had to work the tree from both sides. Really, you didn't really have a choice, and it was steep terrain. And so yeah, I learned leaving the back strap there so that you could just release the back strap, and your hinge and everything was already set up, and you could just step away to your safety area.
That's awesome. So on trees of that hollowness, you would find, I've never had an opportunity to fell a 9-foot hollow cedar. Would like I guess there's enough shell there that you didn't have to worry about collapsing, or did you ever get that like where it was where 'cause I've had trees hollow where when I bore it they'll collapse because there's not enough support, but they're poplars and stuff, eh?
Yeah.
Was there a way, did you ever experience that, or did you combat it somehow?
No, the cedars are like as a cylinder are very strong. Like if we had to leave one standing, machines had a tough time. They had to rip them apart to get them down, but they were very structurally sound, and cedar are designed to be hollow, dead tops and hollow centers, and so we were used to working with just shells. And no, I mean, it was always in the back of your mind, but it wasn't something that you kind of you were running from every time.
What about wedging? How did you guys get around that, or did you just choose to fall always with the lean?
Yeah, it was mostly we'd fall downhill. Sometimes it was against the lean, but yeah, you could wedge a tree as not as a normal tree. You always had your added discretion and added spidey senses, I guess, but you treated it as best you could. You couldn't go against too much back lean. There was just too much weight there to overcome a significant back lean. But on a 9-foot tree, or even 8-foot tree, 4-foot tree, you have a large lever arm where your wedge is that provides you quite a bit of lift.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think relative, the lean is in the forest because of the proximity of the trees. It's never quite as extreme often as you'll find in the trees growing more singularly or more open. You get more variables, or the severity of lean increases when you get into the urban forest. I would say.
Yeah, for sure. They're definitely you're in a forest stand, so the trees are, they have a general lean, and you start your falling process going with the lean, taking into account the majority of the trees. So for the most part, you're falling with the lean. Then you have the odd one that was, maybe another tree pushed it over, and so it has some kind of, skewer lean that you have to deal with. But that's an individual case, and you treat it as such. You get that on the ground and make it safe, and then carry on with your normal lay of your wood, I guess.
We're in a pretty interesting topic. I find it's probably one of the most controversial topics. Not hollow trees and that, but notching and back cutting, wedging. The depth of your knot, the openness of your notch. It's still so like you post a picture on social, and man, if it, depending on how you've done it, even the where we teach to cut the notch, like not right down on the ground, like how do you what would you have to say to people, or how do you deal with the how do I put it, where people they're just unable to see, or even for a minute think that there might be alternatives, and why, how do you handle that when you experience that with people? What's your comments on that?
Well, I guess in courses mostly I get asked a lot, like, what notch do you use the most, and do you like the Humboldt, or would you rather do the open face? And my answer to all of those questions is yes. And it's just a broad way to say they're just simply different tools for different applications. And if I'm in a certain application, then this tool is better, and in other applications, then this tool is better. And it depends 100% on what I want the tree to do, both through the arc of its fall, and then when it's hitting the ground. Do I want to attempt to land it flat, or do I want the hinge to hold on to the stump? And so it's just application, and then the tool that is best suited for that application.
Yeah, I very similarly answer or try to respond the same way, and obviously on social, you don't get usually that opportunity because people just kind of blurt out a comment, and you can't really effectively often respond to it properly. But it is fascinating to me. Do you think there's any kind of a trend in that shifting, or is it the same as it's always been? Like in my experience, like it seems like it still crops up as much as it ever did. And we've been training what we teach, and it's not that we don't, in our courses we don't specifically teach some of the more conventional notches just because they're already taught elsewhere. People usually come with that knowledge, so we focus on what we consider the new knowledge. But would you say that's still the way it is today, or has there been a shift in that?
There, I think there's less people that come in with previous knowledge than have kind of a clean slate, which the clean slate is nice. But it's also, I guess, nice to have the previous knowledge and make everything applicable. Like if there's someone that comes in with a forestry background, or forestry might include coming from the wildfires, which we have a lot of guys coming from the wildfire end. They have their own training program in BC, and they mostly stick to the Humboldt and basically the curriculum of the forestry related falling, and it's all great, but at least they have some application, and there are times when it does work, and there's low consequences for missing your direction by 2 or 3 degrees. And then that's
Yeah, I mean, Tony made that. Sorry, Tony made that comment about that. Like, do you concur with that? Like, is it a fair statement that the consequences are more severe than certainly to collateral damage in the urban forest than they are than in the forestry realm? Like you can get away with making mistakes more easily. Was that a fair statement, do you think?
Oh, 100%. It's the consequences when you're in a forestry setting are relatively low, and I don't mean we're talking like personal injury. I mean the consequence of having your tree miss your intended direction of fall by 2 or 3 degrees. And when you're in a tall stand of trees, like we're talking 120, 130 feet, if you miss your direction by 2 or 3 degrees, you might be like 4 or 5 feet off. In the forest setting, it means you're brushing another tree, knocking limbs off it, which you want to avoid doing, but you're going to fall those trees anyway. So it's not a high consequence, where in an urban setting, if you're falling a tree that tall and you miss by a few degrees, you could be taken to the shop or the house. And so it is very high consequence. You don't have room for any error, where in the forest setting you can play with it, and you can, oh yeah, I missed by a bit, not the end of the world. You go and you make your bucking cuts and you move to the next tree. So I like to say that the Humboldt is even 95% successful, which is really good. But in an urban setting, that means 1 in 20 homeowners I have to go and explain, oh, sorry about your fence, but the Humboldt works 95% of the time. You're just in the 5%. That's 1 in 20 customers.
That's a great way to put it. I'm stealing that. Thanks. Well, and I think too, and Dwayne's right. Like the felling and felling techniques are some of the hotly debated, but usually the most heated arguments are not about principles; they're always about methods, right? The principle of tree felling is pretty straightforward: face cut, back cut, forms a hinge, controlled fall. Principles, right? But there's 1,000 different ways to get to there, and that's what people. And it's the old saying, and I can't remember German guy. If you only know methods, you'll always be limited. But if you understand the principles, then you can choose methods, right? And I think that with felling, and I even see this coming into climbing too, but it's more prevalent with felling. It's just like when people argue with you, it's because they only understand method. And when they're really, really argue with you and won't leave that method, it's because they haven't mastered the tool, right? They haven't mastered the chainsaw as a tool. So they don't understand the possibilities of, like, it's the classic someone, well, you can't bore cut here. That's not safe. Well, that's because you don't know how to do it. That's, you don't, like, oh, that bore cutting, the saw chatters around. And I'm like, yeah, I get, so when somebody's really stuck on a method, it's because they haven't mastered the tool, right? Once it, and that's like a lot of people come out and we do it with basic felling courses. The three of us have done it, and somebody might have a good set of knowledge or whatever, but they want to run before they walk, right? So when you're training a new feller, it's like, trust me, just do it this way. Let's once you master the tool, then we can start talking about Humboldts. Then we can start talking about all the other things that we can do, that you can do to manipulate the fall of a tree. But you haven't even mastered the tool. You don't even know how to use your chainsaw well yet. Like, get that down. And I think that applies over to climbing, very well too. Not trying to change subjects, but I see the same thing. Guys, girls come in, they want to do all this cool stuff climbing, but it's like, you got to master the principles of it, and then you got to understand the tools that you're going to use, and then you can start looking at the very.
It's I was just sitting here thinking. I know there was recently, was it last week? There was the fatality with a wildland firefighter in British Columbia, Kyle.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's so sad that there's been one in BC, then the Northwest Territories, and then Alberta in wildland fire. I have friends in fire, and they have posts, and it's there. It doesn't seem like there's been any in Canada in years, and then all of a sudden we get hit. I don't know if it's bad things happen in threes. I mean, hopefully that's the last of it, but it's super. It's sad.
Yeah, and that. Yeah, I mean, of course, number one, our utmost sympathies and respect to, well, condolences. I don't know what there's no. It's a really weird situation, I find, because often we get asked to train or to go train after these incidents, in even associations like wildfire groups, and it's a real sensitive topic. But and I don't know any of the details of the incidents, but you almost can predict what the certainly the proximity. You almost always, it's the proximity to the stump. The proximity to where you're making the cut is almost always right there. Is it not emphasized enough, Kyle, or is it just because we make such a big deal of it, and that's why. But what are your thoughts on that whole thing? And then how do you speak of it with the respecting the fact that someone's not to, I don't know how to put it. You know what I mean, I think.
Yeah, I'm not even sure that these incidents, I have no idea what the incidents were in the other provinces and territories, but I don't believe it was chainsaw related in BC. It was just a worker was hit by a
I
tree,
thought it was.
not running chainsaw. From my understanding, or what you hear through the grapevine, it was just basically a burnt out tree that fell. Like there was no, from what I've heard, there's no falling or anything involved. Just in the area working on, working in the black in the burned area, and a tree.
Yeah. Well, it's never fun or good, and it's funny how the tone changes. Comments about techniques and so on can change quite a bit when you're faced with those types of consequences of a fatality, and or I don't want to talk out of school or say anything without having any details. And even if we did, it's just not it's good to learn from them. I think that's the best thing. If there's some way that there can be to learn from what did happen so people can prevent it in the future, and hopefully we might see something like that. But, just wanted to, it just popped into my head, and we always try to acknowledge it doesn't matter who it is. And I mean, there's been several arborists killed this year as well. So, I hate to say it seems to be a fact of it, Kyle. Like we haven't really talked about this one either, but what are your thoughts on that whole thing as far as, like, is it something that it's just always going to be there because the industry is the way it is, or is the road to zero something that's...
Man, you'd like to think that it would be attainable, but there's a certain amount of, I guess, inherent risk when you deal with trees. I mean, there's been people killed on a golf course driving a golf cart that were golfing, and a tree's, gets blown down on them. I think, I can't even remember if it was the Masters this year, and trees blew down while the tournament was going on. And it just happened that it was somebody, a golfing group that didn't draw a big crowd. They said if it was a really popular golfer that had a big crowd, there would have been people under those trees. So you're dealing with nature and trees. There's always going to be the X factor, I guess. And you as long as you do the steps in your falling plan or when you're running chainsaw, then you're in the 90 percentile, right? The 5-15-90. You want to put yourself in the 90. You don't want to default to the 10% that potentially could get hurt, because those are the 10 that are gonna.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting thing, Dwayne. There's always, everyone says, 0 injuries, 0 fatalities, whether it be in logging or arboriculture. I think we need to rephrase it. I look forward to a year where we have 0 fatalities or injuries because of a direct violation of best industry practice and good sense, right? Because you're going to have the wildfire worker that's doing the right thing the right way, and something tragic happens. I mean, if you've been in this industry long enough, you've done it right and something's gone wrong. Now, if you do it right often enough and well enough, typically the consequences of that going wrong are less. But still, I look forward, for me, 0, that road to 0 means I look forward to, and I think it's possible, that nobody is hurt or killed in the forestry industry or the arboriculture industry through it by committing a direct violation of best industry practice and just good judgment. If we could get that year, I think that's possible. Is it possible to have absolutely nobody die? I don't know if that is, because there's so many factors that roll into it, because we don't work with impunity, because you could be doing the right thing the right way and something could still go wrong. I mean, that's the tragicness of it all, I think. But if we could just get people to follow industry practice, make good decisions, then I think we'd be on that road to 0.
Yeah, if we could cure... There's been, someone said that something about curing ignorance and apathy would go a long way in curing a lot of problems, and then just, blatant ignorance, and then just ignorance, just not knowing innocently, and then choosing not to know out of belligerence, that's, if there was a way to curb that, it would be. But yeah, I agree. The inherent nature of what we do, there's just elements of risk that are there that, could result in things happening. But, we were talking about our good friend James, whose celebration of life was last weekend, and the weekend before last, I guess. But, like, even what happened to him, that was very random. And, I couldn't, they like the incident that occurred, his fall on the bike, what that could happen to anybody. And he wasn't ill prepared. He wasn't, and it was just a bad fall, a slip on a loop. From my understanding, Kyle, it's like it was, there wasn't, he didn't do anything wrong to deserve that, or to, he wasn't negligent. Let's put it that way, right?
No, he wasn't young and foolish by any means. He was
no,
in his mid-60s, riding his mountain bike and having fun. And anybody that rides mountain bikes, you have crashes all the time. And if you don't have a crash, then you know one's coming. And usually then you have a crash and you tumble, you go over the bars or something, and then you get up and it's like, okay, carry on. Now I'm good for a while. And it's just super random, right?
Speaking of James, I always learned a lot from James. And, James is an interesting one because, he embodies a lot of the tree actions whole concept in the human forest, because he was more than just an arborist, right? He had endured life lessons that created change. His woundwood was strong. Let's put it that way. And he had a way of conveying that. And ultimately, I really, the more I've pondered his decision, it was probably one of the strongest, most powerful lessons I ever learned, was how to, respect yourself, or to make the transition. It was a really, it challenged me on many levels. And in the end, it just, my respect and admiration for him grew out of the whole thing. But he was like he's like a symbol in the human forest of great dignity and strength. A trees whose legacy, his remnants in the human forest will be felt for years to come. And you know, yeah, how we integrate into this stand of people that we surround ourselves with is a powerful thing. But and I know that he had an influence on you. So um, how do you? We always make a bit of a transition to, where we've been talking technique and cutting, but how has just being in trees and involved with trees, how would you say it's affected you, not just professionally like we've been talking, but personally as a person, through your friends and relationships? Do you ever draw a correlation from spending time in the trees to your own self?
Oh, absolutely. I actually, it just made me think of it. I did a Instagram post, I don't know, a couple of years ago now. DJ and Tiger, one of them, they were both in on it, but it was either like 40 push-ups for 40 days or something like that, or do a post. And so I did a post about trees and how I really feel that people are very similar to trees in that we don't ever heal from what has affected us. We just seal. And it's always going to be there inside, and we just kind of put some wound wood around it and either cover it up, don't talk about it, or however we deal with it personally. But it's so similar, and it's how people are, and how they compartmentalize our wounds internally, wall them off, block them off, carry on.
Yeah, I think the woundwood analogy is so powerful because, in trees, woundwood is actually stronger than the original wood, and it doesn't have to hide the wood. Not always. It doesn't always seal it right up, and it'll could produce woundwood until the tree is strong enough that it doesn't sense that as a defect anymore. Like, what an amazing analogy. Like, if we endure it and we cover or we build, but it makes us strong as we were before the injury, or even, and that wood there is stronger. You know, that concept I find very beautiful for, as far as, not that we look for ways to get hurt, but sometimes those hurts can actually, they help form and shape us, like trees.
Oh, absolutely. And then further to that, how trees, I mean, some of my closest friends now and are the treeple, the people that hang out in trees, and James was a huge part of that. And even going to his celebration of life and meeting up with the people that were down there, and getting to reconnect with them. I hadn't seen most of them since probably the PNW climbing the chapter championships that were in Stanley Park in 2019. I hadn't seen most of them since then. I seen a few, like Emro was there, and I'd seen her at some of the Nats ArbCan events, which was great and good to reconnect with her and a bunch of just the PNW folk that were there. It was just great to see them and really, fills your heart.
Yeah, I would have. It would have been a real cool time. How many people do you think were in attendance? It was a pretty big group, I imagine.
I would shoot. I don't know. I would guess over just around 100, maybe over 100 that were at the actual inside. There was this little barn or a building, open-ended building where everyone gathered on Saturday afternoon. It was absolutely not formal. It was just open mic and everyone told stories. And I would say there's probably that many people in there, but the whole event was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And there was people there Friday that didn't stay for Saturday. And there's people that came after the main gathering on Saturday, or people that were there Saturday morning and left, and people, so there's people hanging out the whole weekend and just being able to connect with those people and, spend a couple nights camping down there and just really feeling the James vibe. We were out on paddle boards on the lake and, just sitting and chilling out and chatting and talking about life and how James's influence on our life. You always kind of take a step back, and when you're having a problem or trying to deal with difficult people, it's like, okay, how would James handle this? And you always kind of look to that, his presence to help.
Yeah, we would have definitely had him as a guest. It wouldn't. There's no question we would have invited him and asked him for sure. I wonder if what would what's your one you're willing to share, a memory or a learning or a lesson that you directly link to James. Is there one you could share with us?
I guess two. One of the main ones was he took me on my first big tree climb. After a Vermeer seminar that he was hosting, I guess. We went down. I went across the border and stayed with him and Beth at their house. And actually, KT Bigelow came up and she stayed at his house too. And then we all went out with. There was a couple more people, and I can't even remember who it was. I think we narrowed it down, or we figured out it was 2013 when we did the climb. And in Washington, and just his whole process about introducing yourself to the tree and touching the tree, just making good with the fact that you're going to climb. You weren't doing any removal, not even, you leave all the dead wood, you don't do anything, but just, have a relationship with the tree. And it's a living being. And then without being too spiritual, just, introducing yourself and getting to know the tree and say, hey, we're going to have fun together today. So that was one. The other one was, what's the point of a conversation? Like, what are you trying to get out of the conversation? What's the goal of it? Of any conversation or any interaction with someone is, not to overthink it, but if it's a discussion or a heated discussion, it's like, okay, why do I feel so emotional about this conversation, and what do I want to get out of it?
Yeah. Well, that's like I was saying, there was more than just. Always with James, there was more than just tree talk. There was always tree talk, but there was always a personal side, even a somewhat spiritual side. There was more than just business. It always crossed over. At least it did for he and I think it did with anyone that got to know him, right? And it could happen very quickly. I remember he asked me to reach out to some of the Parks Canada people that he only met once. And, of course, we did a trainer together with them so that, you get to know people pretty good, but he formed a strong bond with them very quickly. And he had that way with people, and it was always an intention. It seemed like he was focused on, yeah, there wasn't idleness, or wastefulness. It was intent. It was always an intention. Well, it's been a good chat. We while we were talking about notches, I just wanted to just go back to that a little bit, because we're from taking tops out of trees. That's the one area where I find it still, it's not really policed. It's not governed. There's no regs on cutting a notch in the top of a tree to take a top out, because you just don't. There's nothing on it. Like, it's not like, you'll find various standards on felling trees, cutting notches in the base of trees, but cutting notches in the tops of trees. And out there, especially, when my experience, when I first started cutting tops out of trees in the West Coast, it's like, this is a damn sized tree that I fell from the ground, and I'm felling it at 80, 90 feet or 100 feet or whatever, even higher. So, and the controversy that exists up there, like as far as notching and type and hinge and opening, and is even more vast, it seems like. Having I don't know a lot of people, Kyle, personally, that I don't really know, maybe a couple, but no one, I don't know anyone as well as I know you that has the depth of experience in both realms, from felling on the ground, all size and manner of trees, from the forest as a hand faller into the urban forest as a technical faller, or falling trees where the consequences are greater. And then, in addition to that, you've not only done that, you've taken it into the aerial position. So I think you're in a very unique position to share some unique perspectives on that, not only from having done it, but having the depth of experience from having done it on the ground in the beginning to where you are now. So no specific question, just that whole topic of what notch and how to cut up there. What do you? I'm curious what you'd have to say about all that.
And it goes back to the application of what you want to do. Long story short, it goes right back to James. I can remember sitting having dinner with him and having this exact conversation, and we had chopsticks, and we had to ask for a steak knife from the waitress, and we were having sushi and some sort of bowl, a poke bowl or something, and she didn't know why we needed a steak knife, but we were sawing on chopsticks and like having the action of a tree or a top falling and what happens to the stem. And then we were talking about the opening of the notch and whether you want it in a Humboldt or a conventional type notch, and going through that whole process. And there's depending on what you want the top to do, I guess, is what kind of notch. I would say right now my default is a Humboldt, and it's open about 50 degrees.
And that's to achieve a flat landing top. Is that
a
the
flat
reason?
landing, but also with a Humboldt, because the butt of the tree or butt of the top is in front of the stem or the stump, there's no chance of stump shot. So you're eliminating that. The 50-degree opening, because I want it more than 45, where there's maximum pushback on my stem. We're already coming back to neutral, but not more than 70 degrees, because the hinge wood holds on too long, like even past the 70 degrees, if that's your notch opening. And then when the hinge does break, the top that you're tied to and your life support is actually starting to bend forward, and the hinge breaks, then it's a really violent shake. And so it's like getting all those pieces of the puzzle and trying to make the least amount of movement on the top that I'm tied to, and having not the top that I'm tied to, but the stem that I'm tied to, also having the top land flat, also having it, potentially not too far from the base of the tree. Like I don't want to create a whole bunch of space if I'm in a confined area or a yard. Just a whole bunch of factors go into it.
And that's it's such a educated answer and experienced answer. You got the training and the education in there, and that's the what Tony was talking about, I think, is getting people to think about like how significant the reactive force of the top pushing and how you can minimize or accentuate that or exacerbate it based on your notch opening. Like just to have that knowledge that you actually can control that, and it's not just, well, this is the notch I always cut. I cut it the same every time. Well, that's I always found that one of the most. I would always try very hard to impart that discernment or the emphasize the significance of that, and you explained it very well there, and absolutely the other thing is and Shiga would talk a lot about this as well, is variety, or thinking everything through, because it keeps, like, thinking creates stimulus, right, and lack of boredom, and when you do things so much the same, and I think, Kyle, you've talked about this before, the repetitive complacency thing. The more details you put into a plan, even if it's for the sake of keeping your brain working, it helps minimize that repetitiveness. You know, and you mentioned you cut a 50-degree. I can just hear people listening going, "What? 50-degree?" But I know for a fact, because I know you, that you're actually, like, it's not 45 and it's not 60. You're cutting a 50-degreer. And that a lot of people wouldn't understand that concept, or even have they wouldn't explain it to that detail, because they just don't have the understanding of it, right? The knowledge of it. So I hope that gets people to think about it, because it's really eloquent. Thank you for that answer, Tony. I think you were going to say something. I may have talked
No,
over you.
I was just going to clean your question up, Dwayne, but I think Kyle already answered it. Well, the way I would have asked your question, Dwayne, if I were you, I would have said, what are the considerations of aerial tree felling or throwing a top that you have in the air that you don't have on the ground? All right, because they are similar. I mean, you could use the exact same technique, but you'll get very different results. And I think you covered that. Like how far do you want that piece to travel before the hinge separates? When that hinge separates, what's going to happen? I used to always think that, when you're felling on the ground, you don't think about the forces that get reflected from the tree going over into the ground, until one day I was literally on the edge of a cliff, tied in, felling trees down. And as the tree went over, I'm standing on the ground, but I'm tied in, right? Because as it went over, you could feel the root plate and everything shift and just move and reflect that energy off. And it's the very same thing that happens in the tree, but you very rarely feel that on the ground, like when things are firmly rooted. So no, I think you answered it. What are those extra considerations, right? And I know that, I think we could have a long, detailed conversation on whether notch opening changes whether it lands flat or not. But that's a whole nother, I think it has more to do with the amount of foliage, but that's another thing too, right?
But depending on where your pivot points are, if you cut on one side of a pivot point, the next cut, the compression and tension have changed completely. And so you can't just cut the same way every time. You have to look at every cut and make a decision on how you're going to cut it to, stay safe and potentially not get pinched, but not get injured. So every cut takes some thought, and that's what I try to impart to my students, is you think about every action and don't be complacent.
Which then begs the question: why did you get into training?
I guess the easy answer is I'm selfish and I want to learn. And so when Dwayne, I'd already been through, I think probably 8 courses, ARBCAN courses, before I met Dwayne, and I had, great instructors, John Ransom and Mark Cook, and James was teaching with Mark Cook when I first met him in the climbing course. But those guys all had a piece of had something to do with why I wanted to get into training and learn from them, but also, like most trainers, as long as you're teaching, you're learning. You take something from every class, and it might not be a technique that you're going to change, but it might be just a way of explaining something that somebody gets it sooner. So my goal as a trainer is to teach a concept using as few words as possible. No filler words. Just here's a concept, plain and simple, and clean, concise, and that's my goal, is to get better at that. But then also people learn differently, so having different ways to explain things is also valuable. So learning how to do that, it's always an ongoing process. So
Absolutely. I think that's what I'm drawn to training for, the same reasons, is I just love to learn stuff. And for me,
yeah.
teaching people other things is a way to learn, well, not only to learn and master what you're teaching, but then also to learn other things that are related, but you wouldn't ever picked up. I love stuff like that.
And another, I guess, selfish, but not really, as I love meeting people. So by default, you have somebody come to either a tree climbing course or a chainsaw course. They love being outside. They love working with their hands. That means they probably have other common interests, whether it's camping or fishing, mountain biking, just being outside. So then I've had built great relationships and have really good friends that have come out of training, that I keep in contact with continually, and they become a big part of my life. So that's really cool too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The tribe of arboriculture, which is, I don't really know any other industries. I don't know if it exists in other ones or not, but I don't think it exists quite as strongly as it does in arboriculture, as it does in a lot of industries. That tribal gathering, even if it's something as, I don't want to say off gear, like the memorial for James, which we referenced earlier, certainly not a tree event, but a gathering of tree people, has a culture and is very fulfilling in a whole way, that you have to experience. At the same time, Dwayne and I were up, doing the Bruce Memorial fishing trip, and I'd forgotten how fulfilling that tribal get together can be on a personal level. You know, um, yeah, you're right. We all have trees and tree work in common, but I think it's all the other things we've learned, from each other through the years that form that tribe, and it's a pretty cool thing. I said I don't know if it exists in other industries. I've never been anywhere else, but I hope so. But you never know.
The closest I would compare is I also have a background coming from rodeo, and that is very much the same type of energy. And I mean, you get good people together with fundamental values, and you just enjoy being around them. And for us, trees is just something that gets us together with good people. That's what rodeo is. Rodeo for me, when I was involved in it and still like to visit with those people, is it was an avenue to get together with those people and spend time with those people. And that's what, James gathering, Bruce's gathering, we just have the tree connection, but we just need a reason to get together with these people because we feel good when we do it.
Right. I think, and it becomes, I know for me with the Bruce, it's a reminder, I think sometimes, of that culture and that community, right? When the tribe's not together, it's kind of easy to forget those links, not forget them, but not feel the value of them. And I think in that, I'm certainly not Mr. Extrovert, Mr. Social. I don't like meeting new people. I don't need any more new friends. I got enough, right? But I do love getting together with those that I have formed, and that's, yeah, it's cool. And it's that, and you forget that, I think. The tree climbing competitions fulfilled that void or that need for me for many, many years, especially on the international level, because on the chapter level, those were good, but I saw those people fairly often, right? At the chapter level. When I went out to volunteering at the international or competing, it was always, those are people I might have only seen once a year. Um, people like James, and, I might have seen James once or twice a year on average, but seeing that. So when you do get in that situation where it's a little longer term, it's very fulfilling, very, very worthwhile.
Well, it's so much like the human forest, and you have those. There's the old growth or the long standing trees that provide nurture and support to the trees below, and then and the interactions of everything, and then the fungus that connects everyone, and we feed each other, and care for one another in a in an energetic way. But to me, there's so many symbols of the human forest to all that, and what I find interesting about the ITCC in particular, in the whole event, but particularly that event and all the tree climbing events, is the people that give their time to set that thing up. It is not a light commitment. You have to really be there and want to be there to do that. You don't just, you have people that show up once in a while, but then there's always that old guard that has a bit of a seasonality to it, but it's usually in the term of a decade or 5 to 10 year range, where someone, Tony, you're involved in my involvement with ITCC, Kyle, you're involved with competitions. Like you go and you give and you help mentor and build others. And there's something about that really, and Kyle, I remember James talking about that, and you spoke of it here now as well, but the selfishness of it, there's always that aspect, we get something out of it. It's why we like doing it. It's not for money, because especially those events, we're not getting paid. And even instruction, like I've never met a teacher, someone that has a heart of a true instructor that, I mean, of course you got to get paid, but it's not really about the money. It's about learning. It's about helping others and helping yourself. And I think that comes down to really having a heart that cares fundamentally about others, but also yourself. Because if you don't care about yourself, you can't really, the degree you care about yourself is the degree you're going to be able to care for others as well. And, that was, and, yeah. Anyways, it's fascinating. And, we've gone further into it. We touch on it on all the podcasts, Kyle, but, you've elaborated more, and we've gotten more into that concept here, I think, than in some of the others. And it's been really, interesting to listen to. I've enjoyed listening to you guys' last little chat you had here. Well, yeah, we didn't talk a lot about. I forgot a little bit about your background in rodeo, and I don't think I've ever heard you draw a correlation to the tribal feeling that you get with tree people that you've had with your rodeo background. And that was something that was more associated with your logging background as well, or was that somewhat always separated?
No, that it was always separated. I mean, my family grew up on ranches, and with that, as a background, so it was easy for me to get into rodeo, but it was a direct correlation for me. Like, it's one of the other events. Rodeo as an event is like a tree climbing comp, where it's individual, but everyone is there helping everyone else to beat them. You're competing against yourself. You want to win, but you're just as happy if your buddy wins, or your partner wins, or if they do well, and you just want them to do well, and if they happen to have a better time, or get judged better than you, then you're happy for them, and that's the general unwritten rule of it. So it's very similar in those aspects.
That's really insightful. That makes a lot of sense, and that's very true.
And a ton of volunteers that have basically they don't gain anything from it, financially, but they just want to be around people with that energy and good vibes.
Right. Yeah, I guess organizing and running a local rodeo probably takes a small army of volunteers that no one even ever hears their name of.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I never thought of that. That's very, very interesting. You're right. You're absolutely right. Huh. Well. So, I imagine your rodeo days, I guess, are over, other than some interaction. Do you go and attend and watch and just reconnect?
Yeah, definitely go and attend and watch. And I did consider entering this spring. I made a couple phone calls. It didn't
Wow.
work out, so I could say that I kind of tried, but either way, I was okay with doing it or not doing it. But haven't cracked out again as far as that goes. But I have thought about it. It's something my kids had never seen me
Wow.
do, and
Right.
my son, like, I have a box it's over on the side there, and it's full of pictures of me rodeoing and competing, and he routinely pulls it out and looks at the pictures and asks questions. So I think it would be really cool for them to see me compete, and not for me, but for them to see. I think it's really important for kids to see active parents and their best role
Right.
models actually involved and doing stuff and competing, trying to, it takes a certain amount of you got to put
Right.
yourself out
Do
there.
you think you think they'll ever get into, like, what if they wanted to
Oh,
rodeo?
there was Little Britches in town this weekend, and
Yeah.
in a heartbeat they would be there. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. They go down
And I
lots
imagine they're climbing trees too.
pardon me.
And I imagine they're climbing trees as well.
Yeah. Mostly dangling from trees. They hang in their harness and stuff.
Yeah.
Not so much actively climbing and tending ropes and stuff, but
Right.
they have a harness that they play around in.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Well, I'm always fascinated at we run these things, and you just never know where they're going to go, because we don't have a specific, we don't send a bunch of questions out in advance and stuff like that. But we get to this time just past an hour point where it just seems to be a natural kind of segue. And I know you got a busy thing, you're a busy man and things to do, but we want to really thank you for your time, the most valuable non-renewable resource we all have, that for sharing this with us. And it just thank you for taking time to talk with us on Tree Actions today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.